When I graduated from high school, I had no idea what I was going to do in life. I identified myself as an artist. In fact, one of my brothers started going to Maryland Institute almost by chance. And I wandered down to Baltimore from New Jersey to see what that was about. And I painted at home in my apartment. And about a year later, I started formally as a student with the idea that I would just go for one semester and study painting and ceramics, actually. I became more and more interested in ceramics, so I decided to stay. And so I stayed for 4 years, got my degree. Wasn't sure quite what to do after my degree, so I went on for a graduate degree at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. After I graduated there, I thought I'd go to school in Boston, so I moved to Boston and just took a class at the museum school in ceramics. And from there, I moved to Philadelphia, where I continued making ceramics and painting them. When I was very young, from the age of 5 or so, I loved to draw, and my brothers are very close in age to me, and we all used to draw together, and we used to all come up with stories, usually informed from television. We would usually come up with a different ending to something we saw on television. Usually they were episodes of Wagon Train or something, and we would always come up. So we would all go to another part of the house and do a drawing, and they were comic strips, really, about how the story would end, and then we'd come back and compare them. It was kind of a competition. And I continued to draw. I was very interested in that, and still as a child, I started making little dolls that were absolutely forbidden to a boy to make, but I used to make them. They were usually kings and queens and things like that, and I kept them in shoe boxes and kept them under my bed. Well, when I was started in undergraduate school at MICA, I wanted to paint, and so I took painting classes and I took ceramics classes, and almost instantaneously, I started combining the two. Once I finished firing something, all the surfaces were painted. And it evolved in a organic kind of way. When I was in high school, I was influenced by a teacher, an English teacher, she noticed that I was playing hooky and taking off at least one day a week. Usually it was my gym day. And I would go to the Philadelphia Museum. I lived near Philadelphia. It was about 45 minutes on a bus to downtown Philly. So I'd go there and go to the museum. The museum was free if you were a student back in the 60s. And I would go in and wander around the museum. It was a very quiet, peaceful place. It was the beginning of my love affair with museums. And I'd spend the entire day there, and I'd sometimes draw, and I'd usually spend most of the time in the medieval galleries and the Asian galleries. Actually, the work I do today has never really changed from the work I started when I was young and uneducated. So I could say I'm a folk artist that's been educated, I suppose. Every work that I do has started out as a daydream or sometimes a nightmare. I felt a compelling need to put this down, to make something out of it. If that's anything I've done in life, it's to make something out of my daydreams, for whatever that's worth. It's really defined my life. I have this great love of history. It started as my fascination with cemeteries. And when I was younger, I remember going to cemeteries, old cemeteries, and learning about I was always curious about who was buried there and what their lives were like. And it really led me to start reading about history. And at first it was reading about the early 20th century, and then it led to the 19th century. And for a while I became very interested, and still am, in Tudor history in England. With Queen's Closet, I wanted to make a larger piece than I had been making in the past. So I wanted to exhibit in a much larger space. So I came up with the idea of using wood to bump up the size of my work. So essentially I started making boxes that the pieces were in. And this particular piece, I wanted it to look like a dress that could be opened, and mixing up the idea of a dress that can open like a doll, and a piece of furniture as well, like a cabinet or a shrine. This is depicting Jane Seymour. I put a JS up here, and I pretty much was trying to come across with the idea that the Queen's duty was to produce a male heir, and Jane Seymour was the only queen of Henry VIII that really produced a living male heir, who actually did become king after Henry VIII, and that was Edward. And but it was a very dangerous position for the queens to be in. So often they came up with, infant mortality was quite high in those days, and most of the wives came up with stillborn children, or especially Catherine. She had many children, but the only child that survived from Catherine of Aragon was Mary, who became the first Queen of England, actually. And this is a portrait of Catherine of Aragon. She married Henry VIII in 1509. And the children that Henry VIII produced with a few of his queens was Mary, was born in 1516. Elizabeth was born, who became Elizabeth I of England, was born in 1533. And Edward was born in 1537. He became king after Henry. For a short time, he died when he was a teenager. As you can see, the piece does look like a hybrid of a doll and a cabinet and about a dozen other things. But the queen also, to me, also looks like a transvestite at the same time. And I think that's personal. That's probably me. But I was thinking about all this piece is also a Madonna. And I've done a series of portraits of women that were Madonna-like. Yeah, I included a symbol of the pomegranate, which is a symbol of fertility. Mainly because it was important for the Queen of England or any country in Europe to produce children. That was her sole function. So I used a lot of plastic pearls, and I embedded them in wax to create a pattern. And some of these are bits and pieces of wood trim that I added in here, and I cut out this shape of a queen here, and another on the other side. The pomegranate actually has freshwater pearls in it for seeds. Also, the idea of the pearl or the dot, for me, also represents a seed or fertility. And it's also can be a symbol for tears as well, for sorrow. Because this is also like a tombstone. Yeah, there's a wooden structure under here, and then I've folded over paper mache, and also bandages, like plaster bandages for splints that are used for splints. And this is a wood here, some glass. There's some glass in there. This is actually a chore boy in here for cleaning dishes, which is copper wire essentially. And I stuffed it with more copper wire inside. These are all crystals from a chandelier, actually. There are a lot of flea market finds in here, in the beads. Up here reads, God save the Queen, and she needed help. And down here, this means the King's word is law. To give the effect of age and cracked paint, I attached eggshells in these areas, and then they were white, and I stained them blue, and then added gold paint and a burnt umber paint to outline, to shade in. And the piece is made in 3 sections, the way furniture would be when it has to move. This is one section, this is one section, and this is one section up here. This is almost like a headdress. And this is the table or base right here. And these are my hands. I use that as a model. There's a nursery rhyme in England teaching about the history of Henry VIII's wives. The first one was a divorce, Catherine of Aragon. The second one was beheaded. That's Anne Boleyn. The third one, Jane Seymour, died. The fourth one, Anne of Cleves, was a divorce. She actually did pretty well by the divorce. The fifth was beheaded. That was Catherine Howard. And Catherine Parr survived, but just for a year or so. She died in childbirth, which was not uncommon back then. And these are the dates of all those events. It took several months. I was working on a pair. This is one of a pair. The other piece that I was working on along with this, it was over a period of 6 months, was one of Marie Antoinette. The title Queen's Closet refers to the chamber that the Queen, it was her private room. And so I kind of used that as a kind of a double meaning for me as being a gay man. It's about hiding secrets, and also the fact that the Queen is more or less looks like a man in drag. And also double meaning that it actually is a closet. It actually is a cabinet that closes. And there's a private world inside.